Good evening. Welcome to the Hay Festival Book Club. My name is Uilleam Blacker. Standing in at the last minute for Emma Graham Harrison, who was meant to be hosting this evening's session, but unfortunately couldn't make it. But I'm really delighted to be invited to be part of the book club and to be hosting this discussion of a fantastic book. I myself am an associate professor of Ukrainian and East European culture at University College London, a translator of Ukrainian literature, including of some of Victoria Amelina's work. And so for that reason, among many others, I'm really thrilled to be able to take part in this event. And with me in the Zoom room this evening is someone whose work I have followed and really greatly admired from the UK, watching what she's done in Ukraine over the last couple of years, and that's Tetyana Teren, who was, until recently, the head of PEN Ukraine, but also a writer and journalist, a cultural activist in Ukraine, and someone who's just been really very much at the heart of so many literary, cultural processes in Ukraine over the last couple of years, and really doing so much to bring literature and books to different parts of Ukraine through her work with PEN Ukraine, including to the east and to the places affected by most by the war, but also taking Ukraine and its culture and its literature abroad and representing her country all over the world, doing fantastic work. So thank you, Tetyana, for joining us this evening. I should say before we begin, a couple of housekeeping items I've been asked to remind you of. First of all, Hay Festival is a charity with year-round activities to connect audiences with artists. Thank you all for your continued support and engagement. The book we'll be discussing this evening, Looking at Women, Looking at War by Victoria Amelina, is the Hay Festival Book Club pick for April, as everybody here probably knows, and copies are available for purchase on the Hay Festival website, or you can buy a copy from your local bookseller. And finally, Hay Festival Book Club is supported by Unwin Charitable Trust, and you can find past events available to watch free online now. So we'll move on now to discuss Victoria Amelina, a wonderful writer who we so tragically lost, who was killed in a Russian missile strike in Kramatorsk in 2023, but who was really one of the bright stars of Ukrainian literature over the last decade or so. Her first novel, The Fall Syndrome, was published, I think I'm right in saying 2014, but Tanya will correct me. And she also subsequently wrote another novel. The title in English is Dom's Dream Kingdom, which is kind of history set in the city of Lviv, which was Victoria's home city, and kind of exploring the often untold and difficult history of that city and Ukraine's very complex and difficult history through the story of a family living in Lviv, a really fantastic novel. But she also then switched after 2022, after the full-scale invasion, kind of, I guess, in a way that surprised her herself in many ways. She became a writer of non-fiction, of kind of reportage related to the war, and that's the work that went into looking at women, looking at war. And she also became a poet, something that she hadn't really been interested in before, but she found that that was a way in which she could respond to what was happening around her, to the kind of extreme circumstances in which she found herself. And I've been really honored to be able to translate some of her poetry into English. And one of the poems is in the book, so it's my very small contribution to the book. It was also some sections as well, translated by another wonderful translator, Daisy Gibbons. So I think to start off the discussion, we'll come to the book, obviously, but I want to talk about Victoria Amelina as a person and as a writer. And Tetyana, you knew her very well. You were a good friend of hers. You observed her career very closely, but you knew her personally as well. Could you tell us just a little bit about Victoria as a person and as a writer?
Hello, everyone. Greetings from Ukraine. It's a pleasure and honor for me to speak on Victoria's work and this very important book with you, Uilleam, who also knew Victoria and who is translating her poetry, but also to speak to the community of the Hay Festival Book Club, because, of course, Victoria was a part of this community. I remember that she visited the festival in Cartagena in 2023, and also she took part at the Lviv Book Forum, which is also supported by the Hay Festival. So it's important for me to be here and to speak with our audience today about this book. But returning to your question, first of all, Victoria Amelina was Ukrainian. She was a writer, and you mentioned already that she wrote 2 novels for adults, but also 2 books for children before 2022. And she also organized a literary festival in New York, in Ukrainian New York. It's a small town near the front line in the Donetsk region. Now this town is completely destroyed, and it was a very painful moment for Victoria at the beginning of the Russian invasion, and she was trying to help people from this town to evacuate them from this dangerous area. And if you speak about her as a friend, I want to say that she was really a great, perfect friend for everyone. She was a very empathetic person, first of all, and you mentioned already her first novel, The Fall Syndrome, and sometimes when I read this book again and again, I have this feeling that partly Victoria described herself in this book, because the main hero of this novel also has this huge empathy to everyone in his life. And it was about Victoria. And I remember, of course, that moment at the beginning of full-scale war when Victoria, it seems she was in Egypt or maybe already in Prague. And she wrote to me that, Tetyana, I know that the situation in the capital is very difficult. And if you need a place to stay in a safer area of Ukraine, please come to Lviv and stay in my apartment. And we spent together approximately 3-4 weeks, and she gave like this space and this apartment for me, my friend, her grandmother, and their 3 cats. And always I remember Victoria had a lot of people from different parts of Ukraine in her apartment during the war. So I remember this moment of her transformation, because of course everyone has changed since 2022, and all of us had to decide who we are in these new circumstances during the war. And it was the same with Victoria, because you mentioned already that at the beginning of full-scale war, she started writing poetry, and it's a very interesting genre, I can say, because it's like documentary poetry, which is quite popular now in Ukrainian literature. But, you know, when we speak about Victoria, it's important to remember that it was always like not enough in her life to do just one thing. And writing poetry was not enough for Victoria. As well, writing essays in English for foreign media was not enough for her. Volunteering, collecting money, evacuating people to safer places in Ukraine or abroad, looking for medicine, supporting some volunteering funds in Ukraine and abroad. It was always not enough. And of course, as a very talented writer, she was thinking about her new role in Ukrainian literature and whether it's just possible to continue writing fiction or non-fiction in these circumstances. And then she had some very meaningful meetings in her life and trips in her life in April, May, and June 2022, when she met the Truth Hounds organization, which is collecting Russian war crimes in Ukraine. Then she met Alexandra Matvichuk, the Nobel Peace Prize winner. And then we went to Kharkiv together with Pan-Ukraine's group of writers and journalists. And this trip to the front line, because the situation in Kharkiv in June 2022 was quite difficult, all these experiences, I can say, helped her to understand her new role in this war reality. So she understood that she wants to become a war crimes researcher, and then that she wants to write her first non-fiction book about women documenting war crimes in Ukraine, and also to write this book in English, because Victoria didn't want to re-traumatize Ukrainian society, but she had a lot of topics and questions to explain and discuss with the foreign audience in these circumstances.
That's a really important point, that the book was written in English, which is, you know, an amazing example of a writer who's able to write in two languages and for different audiences. The book obviously has reached the international audience, but not in the traditional way, I guess, obviously for very, very tragic reasons, because Victoria was killed before she could finish it. But you played a very, very important role in bringing this book to its completion, to publication. And it was a team of people really who were involved in this. It's a kind of, obviously it's Victoria's book, but it's also a collective effort. Maybe I think it would be interesting if you could tell us a little bit about the process through which the book came into being.
I should say that this is a painful responsibility to work with this book, to present this book in different countries. And always remember that this is Victoria who must be with you today, speaking on her work and on her ideas in this situation. But of course, all of us have this feeling that we want to speak about Victoria and to share her work, to share her ideas in this case. So you reminded already the audience about the tragic circumstances in June and then July 2023, when there was the Russian missile attack on Kramatorsk. And when Victoria was heavily injured and then died in the Dnipro hospital on July 1st. And just 5 days before the tragedy, she decided to send me the final manuscript of this book. I didn't mention when I describing who Victoria was, that she had a really unforgettable black humor. So she always trying to use some jokes in our conversations, in her books. It's something very special about Victoria, but also about Ukrainians during the war, during all these everyday tragedies. So I remember this email she wrote to me that, Tetyana, I know that some of our colleagues, writers who are soldiers now, send you their manuscripts or their unpublished books just to save them for the future, because no one knows what can happen in Ukraine in these circumstances. So she wrote with this specific black humor that I'm going to Kherson. Before Kramatorsk, she had a one-day trip to Kherson to meet another heroine of the book. And she decided to write to me that, you know, that Kherson is attacked by Russians every day, so it would be better to send you this manuscript. And if something happens, please stay in touch with my husband, Alex, because he knows everything about this book and about my main idea of this work. So when the tragedy happened, I don't know, maybe in 1 or 2 weeks, we had our first conversation with Alex Amelin about this book. Victoria finished approximately 60% of the text, but we had like a plan of this book. We had already structure, we had a title, and we had approximately 60% quotes in English and in Ukrainian, which Victoria left in this manuscript. So I understood as a manager, first of all, yes, that we need to have a team of people, of Victoria's friends, who can help us with editing, with all these discussions, you know, on the book and on our decisions in this case. And, you know, I always had this feeling that Victoria sent me like signs who we should like involve in this process, in this work. So I remember our conversation with Yarina Grusha, great Ukrainian translator from from Ukrainian into Italian, and also great journalist and Ukrainian ambassador in Italy. So I remember our conversation when she mentioned that she knew Victoria, and I just understood, okay, I need this person in our team. And another conversation was with Sasha Dovshik, also great author who works with English language as a fluent speaker in this case. And I also invited Sasha to join us as an editor of text in English. And then 4 of us had every week's meetings, online meetings, when we were discussing like every page of this book. So usually we read 10, 20 pages of the book for the next meeting. And then we discussed all our questions, grammar questions, some narrative questions in this case. But what is important to say that our main decision was that we can be the author of this book. We have already the author of this great text, and we can change anything in this book. And because of that, we decided to leave all these rare notes. I can understand that maybe it's difficult to read this book in these places of the text, but we didn't have this right to change anything without the author. But the only thing we could do in this situation to add footnotes, and we prepared more than 100 footnotes for this book, just to help the reader just to understand Victoria's idea, Victoria's text better. Also, we compared different parts of this text because Alex Amelin also gave us access to Victoria's archive, and we could compare different parts of this book. And also we wrote our afterword for this book, where we explain all these decisions and all we changed in this text.
Thanks for taking us through that what must have been an extremely difficult process, really, just for so many reasons. I think we'll come back to this question actually of what the circumstances of its publication, the implications of this for the form that the book takes. But I think maybe it would be a good moment for us to read a little bit from the book. And I think you have a section that you'd like to read, Tanya, yes? Occasionally we're getting slight delay from you, Tanya, so I think the connection isn't perfect, but...
Ukraine, we can have problems with internet connection. I do hope it will be better. So I'd like to explain at the beginning that if you look at this book, we can see, as you mentioned already, Uilleam, this collection of reportage stories, yes, about Ukrainian women who collecting, who working with Russia's war crimes since 2014 or since 2022 in Ukraine. But it was like the first idea of the book when Victoria started writing this text. Then it became more complicated if you speak about the genre of this book, because she added some interviews, essays, historical like excursions, one poem at the end, some fragments from different historical books, and so on. So it's a very complicated non-fiction writing, and it's important to remember and to feel this really great non-fiction writing in English. So I'd like to read one short excerpt from the book, and this part, this chapter of the book is about Larissa Denisenko, who is our mutual friend of mine and of Victoria. She is a great Ukrainian author, writer for adults and children, lawyer, human rights defender, journalist, and really very stylish and bright woman. And when the Kyiv region was liberated in April 2022, I remember this moment because our mayor told that maybe in 1 week it will be already possible to go to the Ukrainian capital, but please just wait a little bit when it will be safer. But Victoria heard like this news and decided that, okay, it's time to go to the capital. And I just returned to her apartment in the evening and saw Victoria with a backpack. And she told me that, in 1 hour, I'm going to Kyiv by train. Of course, everyone worried a lot because of this Victoria's trip to Kyiv. But she came to the capital and she wrote about this moment in her book. And among the friends she met in Kyiv was Larissa Denisenko, and this is a part of their conversation during their walk with Larissa's dog. His name is Lucifer. So I will read this excerpt from Victoria's book. It's the first time I see Larissa without makeup, in gray, nondescript clothes, and with a lost look on her face. She was always the brightest, a brunette with beautiful eyes, flowery suits, colorful jewelry, and an incomparable expertise in law and women's rights. Now, a month after the full-scale Russian invasion, it seems that only the expertise remains. Larissa looks like her own shadow. I brought her colorful candies as a present. She is looking at them in disbelief, as if colors all went away, broke into shades, and disappeared as if washed away by tears. She talks, I listen. She has been listening to women throughout her law career. I have to listen to her now. Suddenly, she stops, looks at me, and asks, "Can you see the future?" I mean, I can see today, but I try to imagine our life in several years, and I cannot. Even half a year or a month is hard. I just don't see it. I see it, I say. She waits for me to elaborate. I see the future. I mean, we might get hit by the Iskanders at this very moment, but at the same time, I somehow see Ukraine after the war. I don't know if we are in the future, but there is Ukraine after the war, I say, and turn away. Larissa nods and tells me how there are no bomb shelters, and her elderly parents won't go there anyway. So she has been hiding in the corridor behind 2 walls. Suddenly, her mother calls. "Are you all right? When will you be home?" she asks, afraid to be alone and to lose her daughter. Larissa calms her down and we keep walking. 2 women talking about the unspeakable and the cute bulldog boldly called Lucifer. In half a year, in September, I will see a bulldog in liberated Izium, sitting next to a woman cooking food on a fire in front of her damaged apartment building. I will send Larissa the picture. By that time, Larissa will have returned to her colorful suits and bring earrings. But right now, that seems impossible. That magazine interviewed me and they wanted to take me pictures of me. Take the old ones, I told them. Yet they insist. But how will I look at them? I go to my wardrobe, open it, and cannot understand what I'm seeing. The same with cosmetics. I don't know how I can use them now. You know, when I'm reading this fragment, I remember a great tradition we launched after Victoria's death. I'd like to mention it because, you know, in Ukraine, when we lose people who we love, who are our friends or relatives every day, we need to think and to understand how to remember these people and how to still have this feeling that they are part of our life. And when Victoria passed away, I had a date and time in my calendar when we were going to meet in August 2023. So Victoria was planning to organize a party for me on the 13th floor in her cave apartment at the beginning of August, before her residency in Paris. She was going to take part in this residency and finish this book. So when I saw this date in my calendar after the funeral, I understood that I want to organize this party to remember Victoria and to do it for herself in this case. So I invited all her friends. She named us sisters, and we decided to gather on her yard in Kyiv, and just to bring some sweets, some wine, to speak about Victoria, to remember her, to joke, to share our jokes and black humor during this meeting. And Larissa Denisenko, who is the most stylish woman among all of us, she decided also to have a dress code for these meetings, and we already had one red meeting, one gray meeting, and the next one will be this summer, and it will be the leopard party. So we can work, of course, with the heritage of our friends and our relatives, with our colleagues, journalists, writers. But it's also important for us to find this way how we can remember and feel that this person is still a part of our heart.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tanya. It's really kind of heartbreaking to think about, you know, the person that we've lost. But I think it's beautiful the way that, you know, you and others have kept Victoria's memory alive and kept her work going. And it's something in the section that you read that really struck me about the way that she in that passage is kind of future oriented and thinking about the Ukraine that she is helping to build, even not knowing whether she will see that Ukraine. And it's something that I think recurs again and again in Ukrainian culture, in Ukrainian political and civic life, is that there has always been this sense of building an autonomous, independent, free society, which sometimes seems very far away, you know, in the Russian Empire in the 19th century or under the Soviet Union seemed very far away. People don't always expect to see, you know, the happy ending of this project, but they still work towards it. And there's this amazing sense of solidarity, and like you know, you talked about empathy, and I think there's this real kind of sense of community and empathy and solidarity and connection to other people who are around you at the moment, and people who you don't know, people who are going to be there in the future. And it's something that kind of speaks a little bit to one of the questions that we had from the readers, which was about unfinished projects. So this is you know, thinking about writers who are working towards things, not knowing, you know, when and if they'll be able to finish their work, not knowing when their career is going to be cut short because of political circumstances, because of war, because of oppression. It's something that's happened to so many Ukrainian writers, and Victoria talks about them. Talks about the 1960s dissidents, you know, who would end up in the Gulag. She talks about the 1920s generation, this amazing generation of Ukrainian writers who were almost all of them executed under Stalin. And there is this sense of this kind of continued process of trying to build culture, trying to build this, you know, Ukrainian society, and then it being destroyed and beaten down. But it never goes away. People are always coming back, which for me is one of those kind of really inspiring things about Ukrainian culture, is its resilience and its resistance and this kind of fierce spirit that it has. And there are a lot of these unfinished projects and unfinished books and unwritten books. I think it's this is a question that came from Ruth, who says, I couldn't help but think about all the creative projects destroyed more widely in this war. And it's something I know that you've been working on with Pen Ukraine, was looking at, you know, the people of culture who've been taken away by the war. And I want to ask you about that. I mean, how do you perceive Ukrainian culture in this, as being part of this kind of, you know, eternal struggle and always being subject to attacks and destruction, but living through it? I mean, it produces great art, but it also, we lose so much as well. And I wanted to ask you to speak a bit to that.
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. I think there are 4 or 5 questions inside this one. You know, usually when I'm asked about Ukrainian contemporary culture or literature, the journalists can use this word renaissance of Ukrainian culture during the war. And I should say that I'm afraid of this word, because I know the history of Ukrainian culture and Ukrainian literature. And you, Uilleam, already mentioned this very painful, tragic period in Ukrainian history, 1920s, 1930s, so-called executed Ukrainian Renaissance. And it's true that Victoria also writes about this period in our history, and it was one of her goals to share this knowledge with international audience about previous Russia's crimes against Ukrainian culture and identity, about 1930s, then about 1960s, just to show that this war started many centuries ago, because usually foreign media forget about this historical fact. But, you know, when I think about the executed Renaissance, and it's a very important part of my identity, because I also used to live in Kharkiv, and I know a lot about all these tragic stories about more than thousands of Ukrainian intellectuals killed by the Soviet regime. And I always remember thinking about, or analyzing Ukrainian literature about these gaps, you know, about these empty pages in our, like in these fabrics of Ukrainian literature and culture, about all these unwritten, unfinished, or burned Ukrainian manuscripts in this case. And of course, it's a very symbolic word, Renaissance, or if you speak about empty pages, for Victoria. As well, you know, it's important to mention not only Victoria's work in this case, but I'd like to recommend our audience today to find Volodymyr Vakulenko's diary, because Victoria's story and Victoria's tragedy is very closely connected to Volodymyr Vakulenko's story and his case. I just remind the audience about his story. So he was a Ukrainian writer, especially writer for children, who decided to stay in his small village in the Kharkiv region during Russian occupation. He said, "This is my land, and I don't want to leave my land and my family, my relatives, my village." And during the occupation, he started writing his diary of occupation. And when he understood that Russian soldiers can come to his yard, he decided to bury this diary of occupation in their garden in this village. Now we know that Volodymyr Vakulenko was murdered by Russian soldiers, and Victoria was a part of this investigation of his death. And also she was a person who came to Volodymyr's yard after liberation of this part of Kharkiv region. She spoke to his family, and she helped his father to dig out this diary. And then she sent this text to the Kharkiv Literary Museum and to PEN Ukraine. And we were working on this diary, on this publication during 1 year. And then Victoria took part in the presentation of this diary at the Book Arsenal Festival in Kyiv. And in 2 days, she was injured by Russians, and we started working on her book. So I just remember this unbearable feeling I had during this work, especially during this work on Victoria's book, because I had this feeling that there are so many figures in my culture from 1930s or 1960s. I want to work as a cultural manager. So I want to organize the festivals. I want to organize new prizes. I want to work with their legacy in this case. But now we have hundreds of new cases of killed Ukrainian artists, writers, and journalists. And we also not just need, this is our responsibility to continue their work. So your question is about empty pages, and I can say that it's a very painful phrase for everyone who knows Ukrainian literature and Ukrainian culture. But in this case, I want from myself to remember that empty pages is not only about pain, but it's also about memory, about love, and about our fight for justice. We can't allow Russians this time to commit all these war crimes, this genocide without justice. It was the main idea of Victoria's work. And of course, it's the main idea for cultural, journalistic communities in Ukraine, and also communities of human rights defenders.
Absolutely. And this kind of brings me to a couple of questions that we had from the readers. One question from Jess asks, describes Victoria, I think, very accurately and well as a truth teller paying the ultimate price. And she asks, how do each of you as writers balance this risk and responsibility, which is, I think, is a great question and speaks to, you know, what you told about people sending you their work because they don't know what's going to happen to them. But also there's a question from, I think it would be Jeanne, about the form of the book that carries these stories so powerfully. And she says it moved her more than anything else that she's read. And I think that is connected to this question of the genre of the nonfiction, of writing that is true. You know, it doesn't go to fictionalization, to making up stories. It tells you the truth, as it were. She has a great line in the book somewhere, which I'll have to paraphrase, but it says, you know, that when you find some truth, it tends to produce more truth. You know, truth leads to more truth. The more you dig up the truth, the more truth emerges. And this is why dictatorial regimes are so afraid even of small bits of truth. You know, I think that was a great line from the book. Maybe you could speak to us a little bit about this truth-telling and witnessing.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a very important question, again, with many different layers. Uilleam, you already said that if we speak about nonfiction, it's about truth, another situation with fiction. And I should explain that it's just impossible to work with fiction during the war when you incite all these events and everyday tragedies. And of course, not only Victoria, but many Ukrainian writers had this feeling at the beginning of full-scale war. And before that, in 2014, when Russia occupied Crimea and started the war in eastern regions of Ukraine, everyone had this feeling that we just can't work with fiction, with literature anymore, because you live in such a type of reality around you where you can't think about anything artificial, and you can't think even about literature or something else, because you have so many events, so many losses, tragedies, and pain every day. You can't find words, you can't find this genre, this language to speak about this experience in your life. And because of that, it's very logic thing that the majority of Ukrainian writers started working with different non-fiction genres. And if you speak even about poetry, which is always like the most powerful part of Ukrainian literature, if you speak even about our past, so this literature was born by poets, I can say. So even if you speak about poetry, it's documentary poetry now. The same with other genres. If you speak about memoirs or about collection of witnesses' stories, for example, which is very like widespread genre now. We have some fiction books, but these are just exceptions in this case. So if Victoria decided to write nonfiction, it's also because she wanted to share the truth about the war. Because when we deal with Russian propaganda everywhere, not only in Ukraine, but in all countries now in the world, we should remember that we need to have this truth. We need to have a witness who can explain us, who can show us everything what's going on now in Ukraine and during this war. So in this case, Victoria did just enormous work to check everything in all these stories. And as well, I can say that we as editors also try to do everything we can to check some facts, dates, some quotes. We spoke to all heroines of this book about excerpts, yes, in this text. As well, the HarperCollins publishing house also did a lot to fact-checked everything in this text. So I think it's only one way to continue our fight, you know, against this genocide Russian politics towards Ukraine, to share our truth about our history, truth about our everyday life in war. There is no other choice in this case. But there was another question about this genre, yes, about this format. So I can say that Victoria, first of all, decided to use some fragments from her diary, especially at the beginning, just to explain her position and her role in this story. And then she prepared many reportage stories about her heroines and also included interviews with witnesses of war crimes. And one more detail to understand Victoria's genre better is the title of this book. You know, to be honest, I had not thought about this fact, even working, even editing this book. But in Sweden, I heard this question from the audience that looking at women, looking at war, it's something about passive role of the author. It looks like, it sounds like Victoria just following her heroines and doesn't take any like active part in all these events. But if we read this book, we can see that Victoria is one of the most like influential part of this story, of this trip from one place to another. So I have this feeling that Victoria created this title just at the beginning of her work, when she had this first idea to write just a collection of stories, just reportage stories. In this case, of course, she's like a journalist, writer who is a passive author, you know, in this story. But when she started writing, she understood that it's not a right role if you want to share the truth. In this case, of course, usually the audience wants to feel and to trust the author's voice. And because of that, Victoria decided to be more visible in this text.
Yeah, and I think to me, it's very, very effective to have her voice, as an observer, but also a participant, as she is looking at these women, but she is one of those women very much, and she's living everything alongside them very much in the same situations, on the same level. You mentioned kind of how this kind of reflects what other Ukrainians are writing, other Ukrainian writers are doing. Victoria was not the only one to turn more towards nonfiction, but also to turn towards poetry. And this, I guess, brings us quite neatly to questions we had about recommendations. So people are asking, we had Thomas who asked us, what would we recommend they read next of Victoria's? We can come to that in a second. We also had from Alice a question, what other books can help people outside of Ukraine understand the war? And I think we can definitely give some recommendations from other authors about the war. And we had another from Marcus, more generally saying, could you recommend other Ukrainian writers we should read right now? So maybe this would be a good time to take a couple of minutes to give people some leads and some hints what they could read next. I mean, maybe let's start off with Victoria's own work, because this is the only book available in translation right now, but others are coming. Maybe you want to say a couple of words about what's in the pipeline, if you know more. I know a little bit, but maybe you know more. So I think the novel Dom's Dream Kingdom, there are plans for that to be translated and published. I'm not sure. I don't think it's imminent, but it's coming. It's a great novel, so please, keep Victoria in your mind and remember that when it comes out. And also, there is a plan to publish more of her poetry, which I am involved in very much as the translator. So I hope that's going to be fairly soon. But I think that's probably everything that we can say about that at the moment.
No, it's the most difficult question I usually have at different events abroad about like the best Ukrainian books to recommend. And I decided to prepare for this question. And when I used to work for PEN, because I left my position as a director 3 months ago, I decided to launch and prepare such a list of Ukrainian books published in different languages after 1991, and which can help the audience to understand Ukraine better in this case. So I will be grateful if Chris or other colleagues from the Hague Festival can share this link. I send it to the chat. So you will find there 100 books, Ukrainian books translated into English, French, German, for adults and children, nonfiction, fiction, poetry, and so on. I think it will be easier and better structured for you in this case. So all these books you can find. Maybe just a few recommendations from my side. First of all, I think about Stanislav Aseyev's nonfiction book. Maybe you can help me with translation in English about isolation camp.
So there's In Isolation is the title, I think. Yeah.
Use metaphor there. So, but you can find all his books translated into English and other languages. So Stanislav Aseyev is our colleague and friend, Ukrainian journalist and writer, who was captivated by Russians in occupied Donetsk before the full-scale war. I can be mistaken here, but it seems in 2017, because he decided to stay in his native city and continue his work as a journalist. And it's understandable when we know about Russian methods that he was arrested and he spent more than 1 year in just one of the most awful places in occupied territories, the isolation camp. And when he was freed, more than in one year, he decided to write a nonfiction book about his experience. So it was written before 2022, but usually I say that this is one of the most powerful books about the Russia's war against Ukraine, because this book is about nature of the Russian Empire and about methods they use in their wars and conflicts in different parts of the world. I also want to recommend you, of course, Ukrainian poetry. I already mentioned that Ukrainians are very powerful in poetry. We love poetry. All our revolutions were this poetry. And after 2014, after the Revolution of Dignity, I think that just hundreds of new Ukrainian poets appeared in our literature. And it's very important to know about these names because poetry can help us to express our feelings, to express our experience of war. But for us also, you know, when we gather at different poetry events, and sometimes these are hundreds of Ukrainians who want to listen to poetry now, for us it's a moment when we can feel emotions, our emotions in these poems we can't express now because of the war, because it's difficult to express your feelings, but you can find these feelings in the poems written by Ukrainian poets. So you can find translations, English translations of Sergій Жадан, Юлія Мусаковська, Галина Крук, Мар'янна Кияновська, and other great Ukrainian poets as well. And I can recommend some books written about the war, about different periods of this Russia's war against Ukraine. For example, Orphanage, written by Sergій Жадан, and 0 Point, written by Artem Chekh, who is also a great Ukrainian author, and maybe two more. Okay, it's difficult to stop when you a reader, book reader. So also I'd like to recommend you Alexander Mehed's new nonfiction book. I need your help with English translation because it's another title. It's
The Language of War, I think is the title. Yeah.
It was one of the most important books written after 2022 in Ukrainian literature. And this is a nonfiction book of the writer who lost his house after the beginning of Russian full-scale war and who then decided to join the army. So this is the book about his feelings, about losses of his friends, and about very important, sometimes angry thoughts about this situation when the neighbor's country decided to go with war to your land and to your homeland in this case. So this one and one more author to follow, this is Artem Chapai, who is really great storyteller, and I know that his book, The Ukraine, yes, and some more, were translated into English, and it's a great translation. So it's important to find these books as well. And maybe one more, Sofia Andruchovich, because this is a really beautiful writing and beautiful Ukrainian literature.
Yeah, and Sofia Andruchovich's novel Amadoka has been translated by Daisy Gibbons, as I mentioned before, a wonderful translator, and an amazing novel. That will be, I think, an event when it comes out. Yeah, you had, the list was almost all the same ones that I would have recommended. I would also add maybe Olena Styashkina, whose book Ukraine, Love, War is a really interesting one about this, but also Cecil the Lion Had to Die is another one published by Harvard.
By Oksana Zabushko, nonfiction book after 2022. So
Yeah.
you can find this book also translated into many languages already. But Oksana Zabushko wrote a lot of novels and poetry books, so you can find a lot of books written by her. And maybe one more name. This is Sergei Plokhy, historian who works at Harvard at the moment and who wrote a lot of books about Ukrainian history. The Gate of Europe, I think this is the most popular, the most famous. And if you want to know more about Ukrainian culture and history, you can start, I think, from this book.
Absolutely. I'll add one more, which is a book that I have a vested interest in, which is Olesya Khromaychuk's The Death of a Soldier, told by his sister, which happens to be written, the author happens to be my wife, but I do thoroughly recommend it as a really good book about the war.
Recommend this book. I should say, and I wrote to Olesya about my feelings when I read it, that this book helped me after Victoria's death and after many other losses in my life, because it's also about this question, how to remember people who we lost and who we continue to love in our life, how to work with their legacy, how to share their stories and their voices. So this book describes all these periods we have in our life after all these losses. So I think this book is not only about the war, about these unfair circumstances of war, but it's also about losses of our beloved people. So it was very helpful for me to read this book last year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so many. I think you and I could go on and on and on with the long list. But we have a few minutes left. So I think what I'll do is we'll have a final very short reading, and then we'll have the final question as well, which we'll answer very briefly from the readers. So the last thing we will read is the poem, which comes instead of an epilogue. It's called A Poem Instead of an Epilogue in the book, in which I translated from Vika's Ukrainian original. And this was the second time that I met Victoria. She came to London and we organized an event with her at University College London. And a couple of days before, she sort of wrote to me and said, "Oh, I decided I'd like to read this poem, which I wrote recently. Can you translate it?" And I sort of, was initially like slightly grumpily saying, "Oh, you could have given me more notice to translate this poem in like 2 days." But I did it, and it's a really beautiful poem, and it's kind of a poem that took on a life of its own, I guess, and was quite widely circulated and read, and I think sums up in many ways a lot of what the book is trying to do. This is called A Poem About a Crow. In a barren springtime field stands a woman dressed in black, crying her sisters' names like a bird in the empty sky. She'll cry them all out of herself, the one that flew away too soon, the one that had begged to die, the one that couldn't stop death, the one that has not stopped waiting, the one that has not stopped believing, the one that still grieves in silence. She'll cry them all into the ground as though sowing the field with pain, and from pain and the names of the women, her new sisters will grow from the earth, and again will sing joyfully of life. But what about her, the crow? She will stay in this field forever, because only this cry of hers holds all those swallows in the air. Do you hear how she calls each one by her name? So I'll move to the very final question, which I think is a great question to end on. And this is a question from Nia. And Nia says, what has the response to Victoria's work meant to each of you who knew her personally? But also, I think maybe the more interesting part of the question, what would she have made of the way her work is resonating now? And I think this is a question to you, Tanya.
Yeah, in my life, in my story, I think that this work on Victoria's book helped me a lot, just to get over, yes, this experience of loss. It's always easier if it's possible just to use this word in such cases, but to continue work of people we love and who we lost. Maybe it's only one way to continue our lives without these people in this case. And I should say that during this work, Victoria presented me like one more family, because our editorial team is just amazing and very important part of my life now. And we continue speaking, sharing all these stories, jokes, you know, all the names of our cats, dogs, and relatives in our life. And also, so many people like came to my life with these words that I knew Victoria, and now I want to know you. This is about power, you know, of our love and our memories. But the second question, can you remind me about the second part?
So what would Victoria think about the way that her work is resonating and finding readers in the world today?
Sorry, it's already 10 p.m. in Ukraine, so I'm a little bit sleepy. You know, it's one more painful thing for me to think about Victoria's attitude to everything happened to her book now, because the rights for this book have been sold for 15 languages now, and this is a huge success for the nonfiction book about the war. And it's just after like some months after the first presentation in London in February. So this is a great success. And usually when I see the audience at these presentations, I have just one feeling that I'm so proud of you, my dear Victoria, that you just deserve this success and this attitude of the audience to you and your work. So I always remember about her as a part of my life. And because of that, it's not only about responsibility for me, but also it's about this feeling that you are such a talented writer. I'm so happy to see all these people who reading your book now. But on the other hand, we should remember that, you know, in Victoria's stories, there are no coincidences. I always remember about this fact. And this book appeared in very difficult times for Ukraine, but I think not only for Ukraine, but for the whole world. All of you know about all these changes, about this turbulent geopolitical moment in our history. And when I came to Washington and then to New York to present this book, I also have this weird feeling that, you know, just 2 days ago, there was this meeting between Zelensky and Trump, the first one in America. And just in 2 days, we presented Victoria's book, and it was really very weird feeling. But what I understood that Victoria continues her work, continues speaking to the foreign audience even now, thanks to this talented book. And I think it was a right moment to publish this book. Okay, it's also not a right explanation in this case, because of course, more than anything else, I want Victoria to take part in all these presentations, to finish this book and to spread her knowledge about Ukraine and about the war. But I think this is her influence even now to speak to the world and to share, to remind the world about all Russia's war crimes against Ukraine during this war. Because sometimes for someone, it's just, you know, playing cards. It's a quote, of course. But it's not about playing cards. It's about lives of people who we continue to love in our life. And the title of Victoria's book, not just looking at women, looking at war, but there is the second part, War and Justice Diary. And it's important to remember that for Victoria, there was this word peace, of course, for Victoria, but for her, it was very important to remind all the time that there is no peace without justice. So in this case, when someone continues playing cards, it's our responsibility to remind the world again and again that there is no way to have peace in Ukraine without justice after all these awful genocidal crimes. And this is my request at the end to the audience. I'm upset that I can't see all of you, but this is my main request. Please share Victoria's story. Please share her work and the voices from this great nonfiction book. It's a way how to support Victoria's memory and also how to support Ukraine and Ukrainian cultural community now.
Thank you so much, Tanya. And this is actually answers one of the questions that we had from Ruth, actually, who's the other part of the question I read earlier, but she said, what, if anything, can we do to help? And I think this is exactly what we can do. We can keep reading and we can keep spreading the word about these amazing books, which, like you say, will, I'm sure, make a contribution towards some kind of justice. We have to wrap it up, I'm afraid. I think we could talk for so long about this amazing book and about Victoria. It remains for me to remind you that Hay Festival Book Club will be back next month. Sign up to the festival newsletter to be the first to hear about it. And also, don't miss the Hay Festival 2025 program, which is out now. Yeah, so it just remains for me to thank you, Tanya, for discussing the book so beautifully and so eloquently. There goes the power, I think, in Kiev.
Sorry, but we already ended our conversation.
Okay. This is the reality of wartime Ukraine. And just what I think this just really undermines how important it was to discuss this book. And thank you so much to Hay Festival for again, talking about Victoria's work. And thank you to all of you for reading and listening to our discussion. Thank you. Good night.